There's a very clever article that's turned up in the Financial Times. I think it's a few days old, actually, and I got to it a bit late. But it's asking if Nigel Farage has peaked too soon. It's not the first time that question has been asked. It was asked about UKIP. It was asked more recently, I think, last year during the electoral campaign. Nigel Farage is, to some, the most consequential British politician over the past 20 years. A disruptor, a rhetorician, a survivor. From UKIP to the Brexit Party and now Reform UK, he's conducted his political career like a man auditioning for the role of national insurgent-in-chief. And in some ways, he's succeeded. The Conservative Party lies in tatters, Brexit is delivered in some form, and Farage now leads a party that has polled ahead of Labour and the Tories in recent snapshots. And yet, the very swiftness of his ascent invites a critical question. Has he peaked too soon? Can he continue? And I suppose the central claim of the Financial Times article that Farage's Reform UK has surged prematurely and has achieved the political equivalent of reaching the summit before packing provisions for the descent. In electoral terms, politics is a marathon, not a referendum, and Reform is now burdened with the impossible task of sustaining momentum for 4 years without real power, infrastructure, or a broad bench of competent figures. Because other than Farage, the only competence there is Richard Tice. Richard Tice, I think, has learnt on the job and is rather brilliant. Farage's challenge is structural. Despite the headlines and the TikTok likes, Reform is still, in Dominic Cummings' memorable phrase, just Farage and an iPhone. No machinery of policy, no trusted cabinet in waiting, no legacy institutions. It is, to use an ecclesiastical analogy, all preacher and no parish. All fur and no knickers. And that leads us up to the strategic paradox. Farage is both overexposed and underprepared. He dominates the airways. GB News, TikTok, walkabouts in Weatherspoons. But his party is organisationally threadbare. The manifesto reads like a pub napkin of grievance, and £90 billion in tax cuts, £50 billion in spending, all paid for with magic beans and the abolition of net zero. Well, magic beans got people up the beanstalk, but there's no statecraft here, only spectacle. And it's not entirely new. The Social Democratic Party in the 1980s soared, then fell. Sinn Féin's polling peak in Ireland collapsed before the finish line. Populists often enjoy spikes of fury-driven enthusiasm, but to transform anger into authority requires time, discipline, resilience, and resources. And Reform UK has none of those. One might say it's the political equivalent of a souffle, spectacular when it rises, ridiculous when it sinks. And the problems are mounting. The scandals are not merely teething pains. They're the symptoms of amateurism. Candidates making vile comments, quitting mid-campaign. 28 or so councillors just elected have already dropped out. This is the Farage talks about past behaviour and the vetting teams, but the vetting teams barely exist, and the past behaviour was theatrical, performative. This would be concerning even for a party polling at 10%. For one claiming to be a government in waiting, it's catastrophic. And then there's a question of unity. Reform's own internal ructions, the fallout with Rupert Lowe, the Musk succession rumour, the grumbles about central control, suggest a party that still hasn't settled whether it's a movement, a vanity project, or a populist insurgency with staying power. And Farage himself, the linchpin, is famously fickle. He said he didn't want to spend 5 years in Clacton. He changes his mind more often than his waistcoat. Well, I suppose he hasn't really changed his mind because the rumour suggests that he's not in Clacton at all. He hardly ever turns up, and he's not really done very many active surgeries. I believe it's all done in some sort of Zoom call thing. What happens when Trump calls again, or when the speaking circuit in Arizona looks more lucrative than the benches in Westminster? Even if Reform were to win 5 to 10 seats, what next? The FT rightly notes that power without depth is an illusion. You cannot run a country or even a credible opposition from a GB News green room. Furthermore, Farage's claim to be the real opposition is hindered by the cold arithmetic of Westminster. Reform is third, sometimes second in national polls, but it is rarely second in constituencies. It's the Conservatives are still, for now, the most frequent runners-up to Labour, which means tactical voting will likely hurt Farage more than help him. Stop Farage may yet become a potent rallying cry for Labour and the Lib Dems. Moreover, the man himself remains, for most voters, deeply unpopular. According to YouGov, 65% view him unfavourably. He polarises, he entertains, but he doesn't unite. And in that sense, he's more Marine Le Pen than Donald Trump, a populist who frightens her opponents into rare cooperation. The FT also notices a deeper danger, the risk that continued reliance on tactical voting to thwart Farage without addressing the conditions that produce his support is democracy on life support, a kind of populist quarantine. It may work for now, but eventually the lid blows. And in the end, Reform's recent surge may serve not as a prelude to power, but as a cautionary tale of premature exhilaration. The media love affair, the by-election buzz, the rhetorical triumphs, all are impressive, but they are also evanescent, ephemeral. Unless Farage can really build and keep an institutional home for his movement, the future will just be familiar. Lots of thrusting and nothing to show for it. Success without stability. Headlines without heft. Reform risks becoming yet another comet in British politics, dazzling for a moment and burnt out by the atmosphere of scrutiny, by the demands of reality. So has Nigel Farage peaked too soon? Probably. And unless he's willing to do the one thing he has never managed, to institutionalise, to delegate and stay, he may find that his peak is once again the prelude to another fall, collapse, and a sort of inappropriate mess.